Okay, this is Ayn Rand and Egoist Ethics, Part 1. Ayn Rand lived from 1905 to 1982. She was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, to a family that was pretty well-to-do. Unfortunately, in 1917, communism came to that country, and it came exactly as Karl Marx predicted, as a very bloody, very violent revolution. And Rand and her family and many others lost a great deal during that revolution. And so Rand saw the early days of this, and it colored her views and her opinions on politics, on economics, and everything else from that point forward. She despised everything that she saw with regards to communism, absolutely hated it as the worst and most horrible form of government. But she had to put up with it, at least for a while. But in 1924, she got a student visa to come to the U.S. and study. She never went back. She became a naturalized citizen of this country, dying in Los Angeles in 1982. Now, during her early years here, she had come with the dream, with the desire to become a big name. Well, really, in the beginning, she wanted to be a writer. She wanted to write novels. But when she got here, Hollywood, the first golden age of Hollywood, was taking place. And she goes out to Hollywood and she becomes a big name in Hollywood, working as a script editor, script writer, working with some of the biggest names in the industry. But despite all of that, what she really wanted to do was to write books, to write novels, because she thought literature was where she belonged. In 1936, she published her first book called We the Living, which was a semi-autobiographical story about the communist takeover in Russia. But it was followed up quickly in 1938 with a book called Anthem. Anthem is a very small novella, only 50-60 pages long, but it lays down the foundation of her entire philosophical system that she's going to build upon for the rest of her career. In the intervening years, she does write other things, but in 1957, she publishes a work called Atlas Shrugged. That is her magnum opus. That is her most famous and revered work. It's about 1,500 pages long, so if you ever have a few months you don't know what to do with, I would highly recommend that you read it. Atlas Shrugged is definitely a page-turner. It'll keep you interested. But it's also her last novel. After that, she turns her attention to writing pure philosophy works, and the anthology, The Virtue of Selfishness, is considered to be the most primary or most mature work in the field of ethics. Now, Rand does create an entire system of philosophy, but our focus here is simply in terms of the ethics. And what's interesting is that really you can kind of see the ethics from the very earliest stages, and you can watch it as it develops. I did want to mention here that in the 1970s, Rand started her own school in Los Angeles called the Ayn Rand Institute. And if you go to AynRand.org, there's a lot of really good, useful, interesting information, videos, all kinds of things for you. So if you are working with Rand, it might be a good idea to take a look at that and see what you can find there that might be of use to you. It is still going strong today. But anyway, we want to come to Rand's ethics. And there's a basic formula for Rand's ethics that we find as early as Anthem. She is going to begin with the philosophy of Aristotle. Rand says in numerous places that Aristotle is her favorite philosopher, that she is the one that he is the one that she most admires. And so it's not surprising that her ethical system is going to be based upon his philosophy. So, like Aristotle, Rand's objectivist ethics or egoist ethics, depending upon which term you prefer to use, it is a virtue ethics. You are cultivating certain virtues within yourself and practicing those virtues towards others. Like Aristotle's ethics, it depends upon reason as our primary tool of knowledge. Reason becomes the ultimate key. As an individual, I have a rational thinking mind, and it's my duty to use that rational thinking mind in order to make choices and decisions, in order to know the difference between what's right and what's wrong. And there's eudaimonism. The end goal is to attain happiness. Happiness for myself. Happiness for me, for the individual. But, of course, by each of us working towards our own happiness, we are actually increasing the happiness of the world around us. Now, to that foundation from Aristotle, Rand is going to add one element from Kant. Now, generally speaking, Rand does not like Kant. She doesn't like the idea of imperative. She doesn't like the idea of commands. But the idea of the imperative of respect seems to have made its way into her basic philosophy. You should treat others. Essentially, it's that golden rule idea: treat others the way you want to be treated yourself. But of course, Kant's formulation is a little bit better than that, because it can't be abused in the way that the golden rule perhaps might. Right? We want to treat all individuals as an end and never as a means only. Rand very much wants to show or to have shown respect, to say that each person is their own individual. Each person has their own rational thinking mind, and each person is therefore responsible for their own goal, their own achievement. Nobody's going to give you happiness, but you want it. So it is up to you to make it happen. But we have to respect that I'm not here to be used and abused by others in the pursuit of their pleasure. So I should not allow others to use and abuse me in the pursuit of theirs. So that idea of the imperative of respect is there. And to this, she adds this massive heaping helping of ego. The idea that I am the most important person in the universe to me, you are the most important person in the universe to you. And a lot of people look at that and they find fault with that. They think that, that seems like a very unethical stance to take. But Rand points out that it's actually very logical. It's very commonsensical. We talk about people sometimes who make sacrifices, and a good example of that might be a parent. A parent says, hey, I've given up all of this for the sake of my child so that they can have these things that I didn't have. But that parent isn't doing that for every child. They're only doing it for their own. And if you ask them really deep down to think about it and say, why? Why is it that you did this? They'll say, because I have love for that child. Because seeing that person happy, because seeing that person succeed, makes me happy. And so in essence, even though it may look like a sacrifice on the surface, it isn't. Because I am doing what is bringing myself that sense of happiness. I'm bringing myself joy. And that's kind of the end goal, right? As Aristotle had established, that's what ethics is all about. That's the whole moral purpose, is to attain happiness. And I attain happiness by putting myself first, by looking through ego. And so that's your basic formula for Rand's objectivist or egoist ethics. You start with that core foundation of Aristotle, you add in that idea of the imperative of respect, and you add in this idea that I'm the most important person in the universe to me. You put all of that stuff together, and that is Rand's ethics. And again, all of this comes out just within a few opening lines within within Anthem. And it is spelled even deeper, even stronger in the work Atlas Shrugged. And that's what I want to turn to now. Atlas Shrugged, as I said, is published in 1957. And that, of course, is during the time of the Cold War, the United States representing capitalism, the Soviet Union representing communism. Who is going to win? Who's going to come out on top? And at this time, boy, it sure looked like communism was going to win. You had Russia, which was the largest nation in landmass in the world. It was communist. You had China, the largest population mass in the world. It was communist. You had all kinds of nations throughout Asia going over to communism. You had the Eastern Bloc countries of Europe going over to communism. You had countries in South America going over to communism. All over the world, it seemed like communism was on the rise. So Rand is going to do what she does, and that is to give us a story that's set in the future. Way, way up in the year 2016, if you can imagine how far in the future that would be. But in this future world, we find that communism has essentially taken over the world. And the final holdout was the United States. But the United States does not fall as a nation, it falls company by company by company. Now there is a company called the Prima Movers, and they started the ball rolling. They were the first. And that was a little tribute to Aristotle, whose prime mover was the first cause of all things. But the company that matters in the novel is called the 20th Century Motor Company. And it was owned by the Starnes family. And they had a lot of employees, including a guy called John Galt. John Galt, before all of this stuff happens, was a very brilliant up-and-coming engineer. But he comes quickly to realize that under this new system that has been created, that individuals are no longer individuals. They've had their individuality taken or stolen away from them. No longer are you working to provide for your own family, to bring home a paycheck, to save up, to do what you are supposed to do or want to do with it. Instead, what you're going to do is to work more and more and more hours, longer and longer periods of time, in order to make money that goes into a collective pot, goes into a collective kitty. And then people from that company can come to the company and beg based upon their needs. And all of this was based upon a concept that was taken from Karl Marx. In Volume 1 of Das Kapital, Marx says, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his need." Under a capitalistic society, people are paid based upon their ability. The more skill that you have, the more important your job, the better off you're going to do. Whereas, if we look at Marx, he says no. This is not the case. Not everybody has the same ability, but everybody has the same needs. Everybody needs food, they need clothing, they need shelter, they need the occasional diversions. That's what society requires. And so instead of worrying about what a person can or can't do, instead we should give them simply what they need. Well, that was the idea that Marxism was trying to promote. But we'll see in the novel, of course, that it's the idea that Rand is very strongly rejecting. And of course, John Galt, who becomes her voice in the novel, is going to be very strongly rejecting it as well. Think about it this way. Let's say that you have a doctor. And this doctor, because they're a doctor, they've gone through a lot of training, 10 years of schooling, 4 years of residency training. They've put forth a lot of hard work and effort to get where they are. And they're doing a very important job, a very skilled job that few people can do. So under a capitalistic society, that person should be paid very well. Let's say he makes $100,000 a year. On the other hand, we're going to take a dustman. A dustman doesn't require any schooling, doesn't require any real training. Any junior high school dropout can push a broom. So why should they make anywhere near the doctor what the doctor makes? Maybe the dustman only makes $10,000 a year. That is considered under a capitalistic society to be very fair and equitable. But Marx would argue that the dustman and the doctor have the same basic needs and therefore should be paid the same amount. And so we should figure out what is needed within that society in order to be able to reach a reasonable standard of living. So let's say we decide $30,000. Well, that would mean that the doctor would get hit with a very heavy graduated income tax that took $70,000 away, leaving him with $30,000. From the collective pot that $30,000 went into, the dustman would draw $20,000, raising him up to $30,000. Doctor and dustman would make exactly the same amount of money, would have exactly the same lifestyle. There would be no difference whatsoever between them. But as Galt and Rand, through Galt rather, is going to point out, that when we do that, it produces a serious problem for us. It sounds fair on the surface, but it isn't, because it rewards laziness. It convinces people that they shouldn't bother to put forth an effort, that there's no need to, because the government is going to provide you, And human beings by nature are lazy. So why would anybody be willing to put forth all the effort and energy and have all the stress and anxiety of acting as a doctor when they can push a broom for a few hours a week and have the same amount of money and the same lifestyle as that stressed out doctor has? We're going to always take the simpler route. And in fact, history has proven her right. If you go back to the former Soviet Union, you find that the government actually had to go into the schools and find people that were good with math and science and force them into careers in medicine, because people weren't willing to take that path on their own and put forth all that effort if they weren't going to get any type of reward out of it. And so we need to reject this idea of each according to his need and get back to the idea of each according to his ability. Each person has to have the ability to be able to strive and make for themselves, to decide for themselves what they want to do and what they need to do in their life to make themselves happy. Because although the Declaration says we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it does not say that that happiness is going to be handed to us on a silver platter. It says we have the right to pursue it. And that means that we need a society and a government that allows us to do that, which is why Rand advocates very, very strongly for a pure laissez-faire form of government, one where or economics, really, where the government stays out of economics, where it leaves it aside. Okay. So I am out of time for this particular recording, but we will pick up right where we left off here in episode 2, or part 2 of Ayn Rand.